So our first question, you can start with your name, but our first question is, what identifiers do you use to describe your sexuality? Why is this identifier important to you? And describe your journey landing on this identifier. You can answer sort of any of those questions.
My name is Simone, and I'm a reluctantly cisgendered female. Okay, so I call myself a reluctant cisgender female, and for now I'm bisexual. When I came to Canada in 1980, I was 20 years old, and I was quite open to exploring both genders as possible relationships. But I was also Christian, and I wanted to find a church. And I had a lot of, I joined a church that was very friendly, but had a lot of restrictions. And part of my joining meant that I had to deny my gay part. And it was a no drinking, no dancing church. But when you're lonely and you're alone in a new country, you tend to want to find a group where you can be accepted. And just before I went back to Africa to teach, I met Andrew. And I fell in love with him. And we've been married for more than 29 years. So I've lived essentially a straight lifestyle. But sexuality has always been an area of darkness for me. It's only in this group where I feel so much resonance that I feel comfortable telling you my story. And I feel I can really be who I am by telling you my story. So I'm still exploring. I'm looking forward to learning so much more.
Hi, I'm Monica. I hate microphones. They're the worst. So I was pretty much only into men until I fell in love with my best friend when I was 22. And when that happened and we started dating, I kind of just went with bisexual because that's what you are if you like people other than your opposite sex. And as time went on and I had other dating experiences, and specifically when I started realizing I was also interested in folks who are non-binary and dating them, I realized that I didn't really feel comfortable in the label of bisexual, and I didn't like the implicit binary in the term. And so I started kind of thinking well, what am I going to identify as? And I really like the word pansexual, but a lot of people don't know what it means, so then there's the extra step of having to explain yourself, which I don't like, and I don't feel totally at home in it, and I feel most at home in the term queer. For me, all it says is I'm not straight, and that's good enough, and that's all you need to know. And sometimes I still use the word bisexual just because it's the most accessible term, and it's what people get, and I can just say it, and that can be the end of the conversation. Usually isn't, but... So yeah, queer is my favorite term, and for me it's really, and I know that there are a lot of bisexual folks, as we'll hear, that don't necessarily connect the term bisexual to a binary thing, but for me, it's really important that I'm very clearly being inclusive of folks who are non-binary.
My name's Jason. I go to GS Toronto Group, and I personally identified as bisexual, and it's not that I'm exclusively only attracted to cisgender male or female, but to me, I don't like the word pansexual is that it's really hard for me to wrap my head around that idea. Same idea. It's just because I was raised in this very traditional, I was born and raised in China. It's just, to me, the world is binary. So when I was exploring my sexuality, I think bisexuality is something that I identify the most with, just because it's easier for me to understand the idea. And especially a few months ago that Winnie and I were facilitating the Toronto group, this definition of bisexuality came to me, and then I was like, for sure, even validates me, my gender identity, sexual orientation even more. Is that bisexuality is acknowledging that I have the potential to be attracted romantically and or sexually to people of more than one sex and or gender, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily in the same way, and not necessarily in the same degree. And another reason that I identify as bisexual is that I think we're not represented enough in the LGBTQ community. Because there are statistics from Human Rights Campaign from the States. They were showing 77% of gay men, they choose to come out. 71% of lesbians choose to come out, but only 28% of bisexual population choose to come out. So I think for me, that's me, and I just want to show visibility. And yeah.
So I'm Winnie, and I'm also part of the Toronto Gender Space Group. And I identify as bisexual and or, similar to Monica, pansexual. The attraction and desire that I have towards an individual is not, I don't distinguish based on gender. And I came upon this realization when I was growing up when I was little. Similar to my peers, I had crushes on boys. And then I think I was from the age of 9 or 10, and in my ballet class, the crush I had on a boy, I felt towards this girl, Vicky Shkotsky, I remember her. And so I remember like kind of asking like the other girls in my class, so, do you feel, things towards girls, and they're like, yucky, yucky, and I asked my sister, and so from then on, I knew I was different in some way. Then throughout my high school and university years, just offhand comments that people would say to me would be, when you say that a girl's beautiful or attractive, you say it different. Like, what do you mean I say it different? And it really got me angry. You say it like a guy would say it. So, yeah. So it's comments like this, but that made me have to look at that. I'd always been very attracted to androgynous, mainstream, well-known figures like Boy George. Growing up, for those that are kind of my generation, Boy George, Annie Lennox. And so it kind of made sense to me, okay, that's always defining the gender binaries. When I watched YouTube videos and as I was trying to come to terms with my sexuality, the gay testimonies, the gay stories, the lesbian stories, they didn't quite resonate. They didn't sit with me. But then when I would watch the non-monosexual stories and their experiences, I was like, aha, that was the aha moment for me. That feels like what I'm going through. And so I often use the term bisexual, and then as I've gotten to know gender fluid and transgender people and been attracted to them, I would more accurately identify as pansexual. So.
What would you like the gender space community to know about your experience as a non-monosexual person? What about the church or the LGBTQ community more broadly?
I would say to this community, you have something very special here. You really do. I love tolerance, but I see something else here that is totally beautiful. And I'm deeply moved to be and see and witness what I'm seeing here. To the church, I would say, I invite you to meet and talk to people in this group and read Wendy's book.
I think mine is just more a general comment to queer folks as well, just the world. I don't know. That's, a lot of the times when I say that if I say I'm bisexual, people always want to ask, well, which one do you like more? And that is the most irritating question in the world. Because it doesn't work that way for me. I'm sure it does for some bi people, but it doesn't work that way for me. For me, I see a huge list of qualities that are much more important than gender, and gender's not really even on that list. Whether someone's sense of humor matches mine, whether we have the same values, whether I'm attracted to them, those all come way before gender. And so I just see a person as a person, and I'm attracted to them based on their qualities. And it's frustrating because I think as a person who is pansexual, I've internalized that idea that I have to be into one or the other more, or I'm really truly gay or straight. And so when I'm, say, interacting with a guy and I'm interested in him, I start thinking, okay, maybe I'm just interested in guys. And then when it happens with women, I think the other way, and I constantly am invalidating my previous experiences because I keep thinking to myself, well, I can't, like, it's not, like, it's almost like deep down I believe that I can't truly be into all genders. So it helps if people stop asking that, because then I can stop asking myself that.
So I find in this gender space group, that it's an LGBTQ friendly group. And then when I'm in here, being a male, I'm just like, if I don't talk to anyone, and people just automatically assume that I'm gay. And I think to everybody, we should ask questions. I think that's stop assuming and use appropriate terms and vocabulary to when it comes to like describing, instead of saying like, oh, we're a group of gay people, but no, like, I'm not. Like, you just sometimes I think we should be a little more aware of those terms. And to the church, I'd say stop pushing us into straight marriages. Is that I know like we have a choice and then we can make the right choice. That's not really how it works. It's just what I want is that I really want everybody to listen to our stories, just to really respect our, like our sexual orientation. And I'm gonna give more statistics over here to show like how bisexuality or bisexual population is very underrepresented. So this is an American statistic from 1970 to 2010. There are $487 million generated for LGBTQ causes, and then 83% of that is directly used in LGBTQ. So there's about 7%, which is like $30 to $33 million that's directly went into helping gay men, 6% helping lesbian population, and 3% helping transgender, and only $84,000 used in bisexual studies and helping bisexual population. And that's only 0.02% in that whole funding throughout the years. I think that's another stat showing that we are just not really, that's why like sometimes I don't feel belonging to this LGBTQ group.
So I know Eric told us just to be honest, and from our personal experience. For me, I love my GS family, my LGBT family. I will be honest that often I feel I'm a minority within a minority. And I'm hesitant sometimes to disclose my bisexuality, my pansexuality. And I kind of feel like a traitor. So if I'm in the straight community, I'm tainted with queerness to bring to the straight community. If I'm with my LGBT community, I'm perpetuating heterosexuality. So it's this, oh my goodness, I'm just gonna hide, and just to make my life a lot easier. But a lot of it is just this pain of rejection. Sometimes I've literally seen this disappointment in someone's eyes. It's just like, oh man, I let them down. And so when you go to these communities, you want to feel a sense of belonging. So I don't want to disclose. So that's myself personally as a bisexual. I've experienced that. I come from a very conservative Pentecostal evangelical background, and I love God. I always wanted to serve God, and I pretty much thought, okay, God, I'm gonna marry a straight man. I'm gonna be heterosexual. I'm gonna have access to a status, privilege. But if it wasn't for a very brave Christian counselor of mine who confronted me, I would have stayed closeted and probably married into a heterosexual relationship. And I don't know what my life would have been like. I remember that session very clearly. She said, because I really wanted to marry this person, or marry the person, I really wanted to be with this man. And she said, Winnie, you haven't looked at your sexuality. And I said, you're a pastor. She's a retired pastor. I said, you're a pastor. I was like, this is blasphemous. And I got up and I was just like, I am not seeing you again. She's been my counselor for 10 years. She's like, fine. Then the next session, don't even bother coming back if you're not going to talk about your sexuality. And that was really a turning point, because this person, she knew me for over 10 years. And I said, why would she risk me never talking to her? And why would she risk this? For what? So I thought about it, and then she emails me this link to New Direction Ministries. And she's like, just take a look at this link. And I click on it, I dial the number, and I talk to Wendy. And the rest is history, really much. I met with Beth, and she's like, there is an LGBT Christian community, Winnie. And I was like, there is? So I never knew it existed. Yeah.
What are some general misconceptions you've come across about bisexuality, queer identity, pansexual identity? And how, if at all, have these misconceptions impacted your relationships? It could be friendships or romantic relationships, however you want to talk about it.
Again, we had that, we facilitated Toronto group for that bisexuality session, and we came up with the two categorized misconceptions. So the first one is about self-identity. A lot of people think being bisexual means people are slutty, they want to sleep around, they want to have the fun of both worlds. And then also, that's sexual behavior, sorry. So that's sexual behavior people usually think, and then what's associated with that, they think bisexual population has a higher risk of getting STIs, HIVs and AIDS, just all those associated with the bad behavior. About self-identity, that's a lot of people think bisexuality doesn't exist. Or they think it's just a phase, because in the LGBTQ community, a lot of people have used bisexuality as a stepping stone. They use that, that's okay, that's my transition. It's safer for me, and then ended up coming out gay. I know some people are not intentionally doing it because they are exploring, but there are also a good, decent number of people that use that just as, this is safe. I let people know first to test the water to see how safe this is. And then that really gave a bad name on bisexual people, just because people were like, oh, look at that person, he was or she was bisexual, and then now they're gay or lesbian. So yeah, I think about self-identity, that's a big part.
Yeah, I think Jason mentioned a lot. I think one general misconception is bisexuals are access to heterosexual privilege. Often I get, you can choose the easier choice of to avoid hardship. I have people like, why are you going through this? Just go marry some guy. To avoid discrimination. Firstly, you giving up that part of your identity is just like being closeted. And no one cares how often you're attracted to the same sex, whether it's exclusive. You suffer homophobia just as much as your gay and lesbian counterparts, for sure. And although if I was in a different gender relationship, visibly it could look like a heterosexual relationship. So similar to what Peter and Susie said this morning, visibly you're looking at that, you're saying, okay, that's different. But it's different to be in that and then to actually to know within yourself whether or not it's true. So if I choose to disclose I'm actually bisexual, it makes a huge difference, because if I were to oppose or try and pass, then I'm constantly in fear of rejection, of hiding. It's just like being closeted.
I'm not sure if this is technically a misconception, but I think one of the interesting things and maybe harder things of being pansexual is not relating to common coming out narratives, and not finding a lot of stories that, like kind of what Jason was saying earlier, that, or was it, sorry, someone was talking about hearing stories of gay folks, for example, and realizing like that we don't identify with that. So I think it's hard because like I came out like late in life, but not only did I come out at that time, I had no idea that I was queer. So it's not like I don't have that feeling of like, oh, I've known since I was 7 or whatever. Like I really don't relate to that, and I think that there's an idea that like that's the queer storyline, and nothing. If you don't relate to that, then you're not really fully queer. And I think what ties into that is like this whole like, is it a choice? Is it not a choice? And I feel like that whole discussion is kind of irrelevant because for me, I don't know if I was born queer. Like I really can't say that for sure. It doesn't matter to me. I don't know if I hadn't fallen in love with my best friend, I don't know if I would have ever figured it out. And that also doesn't matter to me. All I know is like, this is who I am now. And I'd like to hear more stories of people who figured it all out in different ways. That would be cool.
Yeah, when I was first asked to be part of this panel, the first thought came to my mind, I'm not gay enough. I haven't had a sad story. I don't. I really feel I've been so blessed. And I didn't feel worthy, really. So I struggle with that. I'm grateful that I can hear your stories, and I'm always surprised when someone's sharing, oh my gosh, I felt those feelings too. You know, and it's helping me explore, and I'm 57 years old, and I'm still figuring things out, you know? It's pretty exciting. And I feel safe enough to explore my sexuality, which I told you in the beginning, it was a dark part of me. But I'm figuring out where I am in the gender thing as well. And I relate, and I get it, I think, when I hear your stories. So that's eye-opening. And there's so much to learn, and I'm eagerly enjoying your stories because your stories help me.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about your journey or your hopes for the GS community around these topics? So if there's anything left that you feel is unsaid.
I think one of the things that people, the LGBT community, may not be aware of is the biphobia or oppression that we experience on every sphere of our life. Our social structure is very monosexual. It is never presumed that you would be non-monosexual. So if you were to say, I'm gay, you're not questioned, makes sense. I'm heterosexual, makes sense. I'm bisexual. No, you're not, Winnie. You're just too horny. You're just too highly sexual. So I'm having to, okay, and then, or explain now, give your whole romantic or sexual history. You know, it's this constant, all right, you know, explaining. And that doesn't surprise me, that stat. Why bother, right? Who would go through that? So the term erasure, certainly, I think, again, goes back to we're invisible because we don't have a visible marker that says bisexual, right? If I'm with a woman, I'm a lesbian. If I'm with a guy, I'm heterosexual. There is no visible marker. And I think that's part of the challenge with why there's lack of representation.
I think also when it comes to terminology, I really prefer people to say like two people are in a same-sex relationship instead of in a gay relationship, especially if I'm with a guy. Like people call me like it's a gay relationship, but no, I'm not gay. That's just like assuming the person's sexual orientation instead of the sexual conduct.
Just want to say that even though I'm a senior citizen, I haven't figured it out.
Also, I have some resources that if if you are interested in looking into. So for websites, there's byresource.org. So under the resources, there are different bi groups across the globe. And there are also bi media that you can check out. And in Toronto, there are Toronto Bisexual Network and Bisexual Women of Toronto, two groups. I think they are under the same group of people. And on Facebook, there's bisexual.org Facebook page. And social media, there's hashtag still bisexual on Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. So you can read people's stories and you can just hear a lot of information.
Let's give them a round of applause.